This is our first one. We're hoping to do a few of these, so awesome. All right,
okay.
well,
we're good.
All right. All right, well, my name is Roxy and I am the chair of the Sustainability Committee, and I'm here with Rachel, who is our vice chair, as well as Belly, who is our student member. And we are speaking with Bill Tyre, who is the Executive Director and Curator at the Glessner House in Chicago. So we're really excited. They are planning to install geothermal. And so we're going to hear a little bit about what they're up to over there. So Bill, can you just start us off with a little bit about your mission as an institution and sort of, you know, what the Glessner House is and what it does, and how we can all come and visit?
Yes, absolutely. So Glessner House is a National Historic Landmark building constructed in 1887, and it was rescued from demolition in the 1960s, primarily because it was considered a very important work of the architect Henry Hobson Richardson. But since that time, the family has returned most of the original furnishings, an incredible archive of information. So the story is really about the architecture, the decorative arts, and the family and their role in Chicago society. In the last few years, we have really worked to expand our mission beyond being kind of a traditional house museum to really finding new ways that we can provide services to the community. We have some wonderful spaces, an outdoor courtyard, a big coach house that has been restored that provide opportunities for this. So our mission statement now is actually to spark excitement in architecture, history, and design through a dynamic exploration of Glessner House, its family, and its preservation.
That's awesome. I was looking at your website and just seeing some of the cool things that you had going on top of the haunted walk that you were talking about. So that's sounds really cool, really innovative space. So actually that kind of just going along with that, it sounds like you have a collection that is sort of decorating, for lack of a better word, the house. Is that correct? Or do you have a separate collection as well?
Yeah, so we have a huge collection of decorative arts, furniture, artwork, textiles, everything of that sort. You can see a few of those things behind me on the mantle in the parlor. And so that's a really, really important part of our mission here. And, you know, that's one of the reasons we looked at a system that could help really protect the collection safely.
Okay, great. So that kind of transitions into our next question. So like I said at the beginning, you have received a really amazing grant from the NEH, the Preservation and Access Grant. So many congratulations on that. And so could you just like tell us a little bit about where you are in the stage or the stages of planning and implementation? And I think as I sort of mentioned in some of our emails, none of us are engineers. So just a little disclaimer here, we're going to talk kind of more broadly about the ideas of, you know, how you make this happen and what sparks that inspiration as opposed to kind of the technical aspect of it. So just so anyone watching can be aware of that. So what kind of got you all interested? I mean, the thing for me that seemed really innovative was that you are a historic building. And I've heard of geothermal being used, you know, in kind of new builds, like my parents installed it in their house, but that's like, you know, built in 2004 or something. So, you know, why did you turn to that as a solution? And, you know, how are you going in terms of the implementation?
Right. So I've been here for 13 years. And when I started, we had a system of 8 gas-fired furnaces that were heating the building. It's a 17,000 square foot building. So there's 4 in the basement level and 4 in the attic level. And most of those units had been installed in the late 1960s when the building was safe because there was no heating system functional at that point. And so they were obviously approaching the end of their useful life. We had to replace a couple. And so we have a building and grounds committee that includes a couple of architects and people in the construction industry. And so we started to talk about, you know, this is kind of our moment where we need to decide, are we just going to simply replace what we have, or do we look at other alternatives? And the alternatives was obviously the option we pursued because we have gas-fired furnaces, which meant we had no air conditioning or humidity control at all. in most of the building, except for a few window unit air conditioners and staff offices and things like that. So that was always a big concern because of the collections. And we try to display everything in the rooms exactly as the Glessners had it. So we wanted to do that and not have to compromise and move things around. So we really wanted to create an environment that would allow us to show the house as it was intended to be seen. So we received an initial $100,000 grant about 7 years ago. And that allowed us to do all of the work to figure out how the system could be installed in the building. So we hired the consultant that did all the schematics, figured out where all the units would go, how we wanted to divide up the building in terms of zones. For example, right now, the collection storage area is part of a zone with another part of the building, but we really wanted it to be its own designated area so we could control that very specifically. So we did all of that, and then we were actually able to dig the first 2 wells and do 1 zone within the building. And so we were able to do all of that with 100,000. And that was really, really helpful. And then we also thought it would be helpful in terms of later fundraising, because then we could show exactly what we did and what a difference it made in this portion of the building. And then, you know, be able to do the remaining zones, of which there's actually 9. So then we started looking at fundraising. And then it was not until we received the grant from NEH this year, which actually will fund the entire rest of the project, that we were able to move forward.
So you have, let me see if I can get this right, 2 zones now that are being controlled by geothermal, and you're going to expand to the rest of the building.
Right. So we have 2 wells installed that are currently taking care of 1 zone. We will be able to add some more zones onto those 2 wells, and then we will be digging 4 additional wells, which will take care of the rest of the building. So six wells, 10 zones.
And are the wells, can I just like visualize that? Is that like in the back of the building, or because you're in Chicago, right? You're like in the
That
city?
is correct. And that's one of the things that was fortunate for us. The building kind of wraps around a large private courtyard. And so you obviously have to have space where you can dig the wells in order for this to work. And that was one of the first things we tried to figure out, was to make sure that we had enough space in the courtyard to be able, because the wells also have to be a certain distance apart. I believe they have to be 20 feet apart. And so we laid it out and figured that, yes, we can actually fit the 6 wells. So that was hugely helpful. If we were, you know, if we were on a lot in the city of Chicago where we had basically no grass or ground area, it would not have been a potential for us to even look at.
Okay. That's helping me visualize it. Thank you. And did you look at any other options? And like, is sustainability kind of part of your mission? Is that why you were kind of really pushing to go in that direction? Or and also in addition to that, were you looking at solar? Were you looking at wind? I don't know how much you can do wind for your own institution, but why did geothermal like really jump out to you as a great option?
There were 2 reasons. One is a couple of the people on that committee had already worked on geothermal projects at other buildings, so they were familiar with it and they understood. But the most important reason for us is it was the system that would have the least impact on the building itself. You know, the wells are all underground, everything is run into the basement underground. And so when the units are all in, you will not be able to see any trace of it whatsoever. And that was obviously really important. So that's why, for example, we didn't look at like solar, where we would have huge panels on the roof and that sort of thing. Geothermal, it's one of those things you spend, I mean, when all is said and done, we'll be approaching about $500,000, and people won't be able to see it at all, but they will certainly be able to feel the impact of what we've done.
Yes, the objects will feel it, and that is wonderful. Actually, Rachel, do you want to ask your question? Because I think that transitions quite nicely, actually.
Yeah. So I was wondering, you have a board of directors, and I was wondering how you approached them with it, or what role they played with this decision making. If you've gotten any pushback from them or even the surrounding community, because this is a historic building, historic grounds, and kind of what your interaction with board of directors and the community has been like, and any pushback on that.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So in terms of the board of directors, because we had board members that, were kind of directly involved in figuring this project out for us, they really deferred to them and their expertise. I mean, we were all in agreement that we had to do something. And of course, the rest of the board members, this was not what they're knowledgeable about. So they were very open to the idea. They also really liked the idea that, when Glessner House was built in 1887, it was considered very cutting edge and modern in terms of design, but it also was very modern in terms of its technology. So, for example, the heating plant that was installed in 1887 was kind of state of the art and that sort of thing. So they really liked the idea that we were continuing this theme of innovation in the 21st century, just like the Glessners did with what was available back in the 1880s. So we really liked that and thought, we can really play off of that. In terms of the community, we have a great community around us. We made them aware of the project, although because the work is mostly going on in the courtyard, there's very little impact to the neighbors around us and that sort of thing. But we did notify all of them just so that they would know what was going on. Like there was going to be a dumpster out front for, 3 weeks during the drilling and that sort of thing. But there wasn't, the noise really didn't impact them. And what we found was, as we alerted them, they were actually really interested because most of them are like, well, what is geothermal? What does that even mean? So it was kind of a nice opportunity to engage in a little dialogue and just let them know what we're doing to keep the building, sustainable for the foreseeable future.
Excellent, excellent. And did you reach out to the local newspaper and have them kind of broadcast this, or are you waiting to do that until maybe later on when it's complete?
Yeah, so we are waiting because we haven't actually started the digging of the wells yet. We had hoped to start that in October. There's some delays with our permits because the drilling actually goes through the water table. So we have to get approval from the county health department. And unfortunately, with everything going on this year, the county health department is a bit overwhelmed with what they need to deal with. So we don't actually know when we start, but when we're at a good point where it's kind of like a good visual, we are going to take advantage of that and hopefully get some good press. And again, because it is kind of a very modern technology, it's, we feel a much more interesting story than if we were just replacing our 8 furnaces with 8 furnaces. That's like, well, everybody does that. But it's like, well, here's Glessner House doing something that's really interesting, and maybe it's something you can do as well. So.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the press releases and the articles about it.
Yes, and when we did phase 1, there's a woman, and I'm not going to remember the name of the website, unfortunately, but she has a website where she specifically focuses on projects, geothermal projects. And so during our first phase, she actually wrote 3 or 4 articles on her site where it kind of explained what was going on. And she is more of a technical person. So I really appreciated that she did that because she was able to write these articles in a way that I would not be able to because I don't necessarily understand the specifics. I think it's called Historicycle. And I've already been in touch with her, and she's going to do some follow-up articles now that we're going into to part 2. So that was kind of the easiest way for us to kind of get the word out, because then we would just direct people to those links and they could read her articles.
Excellent. That sounds great.
Yeah, that would be really awesome for us to have a look at and maybe promote her work as well. Yeah, I'm I just love this whole idea of the fact that they were really innovative and that you guys are now adopting I mean, that's so beautiful. Is there any kind of plan to do some programming at the institution around when it's done, or at any point?
Yeah, so what we hope to do in January, assuming that we get our permit and we can get started with the digging, is we will have an online program for people so we can explain what the process is. And we work with a wonderful consultant. His name is Mark Nussbaum. He did the first phase, and he'll obviously be working on the second phase. And so he'll be participating again because he can speak about this in a way that I can't. I know it's a big hole in the ground, but he actually explains why there's a big hole in the ground. And then what we would like to do at certain phases is we will offer some hard hat tours for people who actually want to see it being installed. Now these will be very small, and again, it's all dependent on the pandemic, if we can even have people in the building at the beginning of the year. But our hope is to be able to do some tours, and I think it would be really interesting because it also gets people into some parts of the building that they never get to see. So, you know, the basement, we have a sub basement. So those are the two things we're kind of hoping to do to give people that are interested, you know, a chance to really see more and learn more, depending on their level of interest and knowledge.
That's really cool. Yeah, I sort of am always interested in how museums and cultural institutions can kind of function in this space of like exciting people and even leading the way and inspiring, which it sounds like you guys are 100% plugged into. So that's really awesome. When it's done, you said that you won't notice anything. Is it going to basically fuel the existing radiator system, or what is it that you have?
Right. So we're actually fortunate that we don't have a radiator system. The house was built with a gravity air system, and so the duct works and the vents and everything are all in place, and those will all be reused. Although we will be replacing most of the ducts because you have to have a different type of duct work when it also is being used for cool air because of the condensation factor. But it's all basically in place, so it's pulling it out and putting a new duct where it is. There'll only be a few rooms where we decided that we actually needed to add something where, you know, it never perhaps worked as well as it should, or there have been some modifications to the building through the years inside, which would result in a few changes to that. But no, we're very fortunate. I looked very closely at another geothermal system when it was installed up in Evanston. It's the Evanston History Center. And so I went up there several times. They were a few years ahead of our first phase. And it was great to be able to see what they were doing. And they had a radiator system in the building. So they actually had to cut holes in all their floors and walls and install grates and ductwork. And so it was a much more extensive project. As I say, the basic infrastructure is already here in the building, which will save a lot of time and dollars, of course.
And kind of jumping off that, the point of dollars, the point that is always the stumbling block when it comes to doing this wonderful stuff. I think a lot of institutions, a lot of people even are really intimidated by the cost of doing some of these initiatives. And as I mentioned, you guys have gotten some wonderful help doing that. But sort of how did you approach that just as a leader at your institution? Like, how did you kind of shake off that anxiety or whatever? Could you speak to that at all?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question because it's an extremely expensive system to put in. Now, obviously, that's because it's a big building and we have multiple zones and that sort of thing. And so initially, we were talking about it as from the financial standpoint of the money that it will save us in the long term, because of course, getting rid of all the gas-fired furnaces, and we'll actually use geothermal for the, you know, the hot water tanks and that sort of thing. So basically, gas service won't be needed. And you can imagine, you know, over the course of the winter, when we get our monthly gas bill and we have 8 furnaces going, they're big bills. So we looked at that. On the flip side, there's a little bit of an increase in your electric bill because these are electric powered units, but in the end, you save a lot of money. But we did not approach it as saying, you know what, this is a $450,000 project and we're going to save X number of dollars per year, and you know, in 80 years this will cover its cost. That really was not the motivation. The motivation was this was really the only system we examined that would provide the proper climate controls for the entire building, and that was really paramount for us, because also a geothermal system is very, very long lasting. So there's a long commitment with it. I mean, they're new enough, you know, you don't ultimately know, but you know, 50 years is considered pretty normal in terms of all the stuff that's in the ground before it really needs much work. So that was really more the motivation. And you know, for those of us who work in this building during the summer months, and we know how hot it is. And for example, my office and collection storage are actually on the top level of the house. It was never really the attic. It was always a finished space, but we are under the roof. And even, you know, even with our window unit air conditioners, if we had a long hot spell, you know, it would be over 90 up here. And I used to think about the fact, you know, at the end of the day, I could go home and take a shower, but I would worry about the collections that continued to sit in that environment. And so that was very, very concerning. And when we wrote the grant for NEH, it really was not about the building itself. It was really about preserving the humanities collections within the building, both the decorative arts and the archival materials that are available to, you know, to researchers.
Do you have any conservators on your staff, or do you work with outside conservators?
So we have an extremely small staff. That's why I have 2 titles. So, so no. So as we need to address issues like that, we would have to bring somebody in. We were just approved this year for the collection assessment program. And we actually deferred it for a year because if we had done it in 2020, it would have all been done remotely. And we're really hoping by doing it in 2021, we can actually have people on site, because a couple of the big concerns, even with geothermal, is still the fact that, like, our collection storage areas are not large enough. And how do we deal with that? And, you know, is there possibilities of putting it elsewhere in the building, or how else do you deal with those sorts of issues? So it's actually kind of nice that that will be coming in, that assessment, as the geothermal is being finished, because then we'll actually be dealing with the environment that we will be living with for, you know, for the foreseeable future.
Interesting. Yeah, fantastic. Belly, did you have any questions you wanted to ask?
I did have a question about collections care. Are you concerned at all about, like, when you say the word drilling, my first thought is like, oh no, vibrations. Are you concerned at all about the construction of the new system affecting your collections?
That's a really good question. And I had asked that before they started drilling the first wells, because I said, you know, should we go around and remove things from our plate? And it was. We actually found a lot more impact about 6 years ago. A big building was torn down across the street. It was an industrial building, and then they put in a townhouse development. And the vibration on the building was much more significant for that. In fact, the developers actually put a vibration monitor in our building. I think primarily so that if we ever came back to them and said, you know what, these walls cracked while you were doing your work, they had a way of actually measuring how it impacted the building. But no, by and large, I found that the drilling in the courtyard was minimal, and the wells that are dug are very small. They're only about 8 inches across. And although they go down 500 feet, it's a very, very small opening. And then they do have to trench a little bit to run things into the building, but that's not so bad. But no, it wasn't bad. I was also concerned just about the sound, because obviously I was going to be on site all day. And I thought, you know, if I have to deal with this sound, you know, 10 hours a day, how am I going to do that? And you're certainly well aware that they're working in the courtyard. It's not that it's quiet, but it's manageable. And it was actually manageable to the point where we didn't have to stop our tours, because inside the building, although you could hear it, you could very easily still hear the docent over the noise. And so that was nice that we didn't have to stop that. We will be closing in January and February of this year, for 2 reasons. One is it tends to be a very slow time for us. And with the pandemic potentially getting worse, we figured, you know, we may have to close anyway, but we're just going to go ahead and do it. But the other advantage is that during those couple months, we will be able to do some of the interior work that would be most intrusive on the tours. So for example, the work that has to be done in the visitor center itself would be virtually impossible to do and keep the building open for tours. So we hope to take advantage and really structure things to maximize that. And it's also a great way to publicize where we're going to be closed. It's not like, oh, we're closed because we normally don't get very many people through the door. It's we're closed because we have this exciting project going on, and we can get all of this work done, you know, while we can just do what we need to do in the building.
That's awesome. I was going to ask if it was like fortuitous in the most terrible way, I guess, that we had a pandemic. I feel like a lot of institutions are like, okay, let's do these projects now. But yeah, so you were able to kind of plan around when you wanted to be closing anyway, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, I had a couple other questions just about sort of advice for other institutions and sort of where you're finding your energy for this project. Like, what's kind of most exciting to you as you lead this institution, and what would you say to other people who are sort of timid about taking the plunge in terms of something like geothermal?
Yeah, so, at first it did seem totally overwhelming. But I think two things really helped us. First of all, finding the right consultant to walk us through the project, who has done this at a number of other locations. As I jokingly said when we started working with him, I said, I love working with you because all the mistakes have been made with your prior clients and you've corrected all of those, so we should be good to go here. But he obviously does come in with the expertise, and because this was an evolving technology, a system that he had put in several years before us, we were doing things differently just because there were new things available and that sort of thing. So finding the right person is key. The other thing I found extraordinarily helpful was, as I mentioned with the Evanston History Center, actually being able to go and see this in process. We went while the drilling was going on. We went for different phases. And so you could really see firsthand just how it was impacting the building and what obstacles they ran across. And there's enough of these geothermal systems around now that it's not hard to find a site that may have already had one done, and just talk to the people that were there at the time and just say, well, what was good, what was bad about it. I've actually had quite a few people through the years since we did our first phase 5 years ago call us. They've either read those articles online or whatever the case is, and have just kind of asked us to walk them through the process, which we're always happy to do. And at the end of the NEH grant, the final piece of it is we will actually be writing a white paper, which will then obviously be permanently available for people. So I feel that's a really important part of what we do. We're fortunate we received the grant, but we need to kind of carry that forward so that others can learn from what we did.
We so appreciate that. We'll definitely be looking out for that as a group that's trying to promote this stuff in the cultural heritage space. Yeah, I think the more places that kind of start taking these sort of brave actions and trying things, like you say, the next person who comes along will be like, we don't want to make those mistakes. But I love that. That's really funny. Did Mark have experience in specifically the museum / historic building realm? Is that a specialty?
Yes, and in fact, many of his projects have been historic buildings. One of the most significant that he worked on, but after he did phase 1, but has now been done, is Frank Lloyd Wright's Unity Temple in Oak Park. And so we actually took a group to see that about a year ago. And that was obviously a very challenging building because of Wright's particular design. But no, I would say a majority of his projects actually are historic retrofits, which made him even more perfect for the project.
Did anyone else have any more questions? I don't want to take too much of your time either. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us about this. This is so interesting. I really didn't know how sort of applicable geothermal could be to, I guess my expectations that it was something for new buildings is totally wrong. So I'm really glad to learn that. Yeah, so we would love to stay in touch as the project progresses, and maybe do a few more sort of social media blasts or something following the progress and any stumbling blocks or victories that you guys have, and victories, I should say.
Yeah, no, that'll be great. And we anticipate with all of the interior work with the 9 zones, it'll probably be 9 to 12 months from the time we start until we're completely finished. So there will certainly be opportunities for updates. I'm particularly interested, there's several units that have to come up to the 3rd floor. And because this is a fluid-based system, I'm particularly interested in how they're going to get all of that up to the 3rd floor. It was easy to do in the basement, and also making sure that we have proper controls in place so that if one of these units starts leaking or something on the 3rd floor, how do we avoid any potential damage to the building or the collection? So those are some of the things we haven't addressed yet because we're not that far along, but will certainly be things that will be unique to this building and dealing with its particular construction and how we're laying out the units.
Yeah, those are all important things to consider, I guess, but very exciting. Awesome. Well, thanks so much again for chatting with us. This was really fun, and we really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, my
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice to meet you, Bill.